Hello, you're listening to Wait, How Do You Spell That? A Rare Disease podcast. My name is Colby, and I'm the editor here at PatientWorthy. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. And today we're going to be discussing idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, also known as IPF. That's a rare lung disease characterized by hardening or scarring of the tissues. Symptoms include shortness of breath, nagging cough, and clubbing of the nails, and can have a slow onset, making detection difficult. Key with IPF is in the name, idiopathic, meaning that the cause is often unknown. And to help in our discussion today, I'm happy to say that we have a very special guest. Murray Walz is a patient advocate who was diagnosed with IPF in 2019. Since his diagnosis, Murray has become active with IPF support groups in Canada with a focus on mental health and family support. Murray, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you on the show as well. Thank you for taking the time. And to start with, can you tell us a little about your background? What was life like for you prior to your diagnosis?
I've been very busy working for 40 years and starting up plants in the pet food industry, the food industry, biodiesel industry. And then I spent 20 years doing project management in different plants all over the world. I'm married for 57 years now with 2 daughters, 4 grandchildren, and 1 great-granddaughter.
And as mentioned earlier, the symptoms of IPF can come on slowly and are first often attributed to other causes. So what were some of the first symptoms that you noticed then that kind of made you aware that something was wrong?
Working in some of the plants when I was doing some projects, especially climbing stairs, I start to feel a little short of breath. And when I returned home and was living here in town, where we live, every street, when I'm walking outside, is a hill to get out of we're in the bottom of the hill. So walking started to be a chore to me going up the hills. And I started getting short of breath and a little bit of tightness in the chest. And some days it was good, some days it was bad. That's where it really started, when I started to know that something wasn't quite right.
Gotcha. And you were diagnosed with IPF in 2019. Can you take us back to that time in your life? Was it kind of gradual onset, or had things just gotten to a point where you just had to go and see a doctor about this?
It was a gradual onset. Like I said, some days was good, some days I could feel a little different. I was at the doctor a few times for my physicals. We used to have a yearly physical. And I used to mention that I seemed to get a little short of breath, and he kind of put it off just as old age and doing too much, do a little less. And so that continued to one time. The one appointment I went to in 2019, I told him it's getting worse. I'm having a lot of trouble getting up hills. So he started to listen to my lungs, and he could hear glass cracking, which is what IPF patients' lungs sound like on the stethoscope. So he finally sent me for a CT scan and a breathing test in town. And he made an appointment with 2 weeks to come back and go over the results. When I went back for the results, he wasn't there. And the nurse gave me a piece of paper showing that I was diagnosed with IPF and gave me all the information on it. And she told me they're going to make an appointment with a pulmonologist so then we can go over the results. So I waited for a while and never heard nothing about the pulmonologist. So I phoned the doctor's office and found out who the pulmonologist was. I phoned the pulmonologist, and her secretary said, well, it could be 16 months before you get an appointment. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I got 3 to 5 years is a prognosis after diagnosis. That didn't make much sense to wait 16 months. So that's when I started looking for my own doctor.
Right. You really had no time to wait for it if that was the case. Yeah.
Right.
And this is something we hear from so many rare disease patients. I think that the average time for diagnosis is something like 7 years, where things are often, it's old age in your case, like you said, or it's another cause. And then when you do get a diagnosis, let's say it's your family doctor, they don't really know what to do with it. They're not up to date with it. They don't know how to treat it. And that's not to say some of the other faults that are within any medical system. So it sounds like you had some difficulty there. How ultimately did you find treatment? Who did you find to help you?
The thing is that what I found information on, a lot of pulmonologists just don't know about IPF either, because it is such a rare disease. And misdiagnosis often asthma or COPD, which is another lung disease, but it's not the right one. And the treatment is altogether different. So I went online and started doing research on IPF, and I found in the local area a doctor about 40 kilometers from where I live, who is world-renowned specialist in IPF. He's a professor at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. He's from Germany. He was the editor of the European Respiratory Magazine, and all kinds. He's had chairs at the university and everything. So he was really big into research. And one thing I noticed when I was Googling him online, One thing he said when he was in Germany, he was a pulmonologist in Germany, and he just couldn't stand it anymore sitting across from patients and telling them with IPF there was nothing I can do for him. And one day he said that there was a conference in Germany, and a doctor from Hamilton, Ontario, professor of pulmonology, he gave a lecture, and Dr. Cole, which is my doctor, he got so excited over the chance of research and everything that this doctor invited him to Canada as a professor at the university. And one thing he did say that he was going to do research. He was going to find a cure. That's what he wanted. And so I emailed this Dr. Cole and told him my story and where it was. And within, I think it was 2 hours, I got a reply from him saying, first thing he said was, "I'm sorry for your diagnosis," which made me feel like there was compassion there. And he said, "If you get a referral from your family doctor, I'll take you on as a patient." And that's when I really got involved in some kind of cure and some kind of treatment. Before I even went to the appointment, he got his nurse to do a Zoom meeting with my wife and I to go over the disease, go over the symptoms, and go over everything, that prognosis, the cure, or not the cure, but what kind of treatments are available. And she told us to write down all kinds of questions for when we have the appointment. That's what we did. So when we went to the appointment, we really felt like we were part of the cure or part of the treatment plan. That's where it all started. That's where I really got involved with Dr. Kolb because he was in research. We got along pretty good. And basically what he said, he was going to put me in one clinical trial, and that one fell through because it was second phase. It didn't work out. But he had another one, which I started, which he was a principal investigator on. So he couldn't really be my doctor anymore on that end of it. So he passed me over to another doctor at the same university. That's where I got involved in this clinical trial.
Gotcha. And what a difference. I'm so glad you were able to find somebody relatively close to you that was able to help you out in that way. This being idiopathic, so the cause is unknown. There are theories, though, that it can be caused by a number of factors, such as spontaneous genetic mutation, onsetting later in your life, or exposure to certain chemicals. Do you or your doctor think that occupational exposure from your job working in industrial plants might have played a part here?
We would discuss that very often, and we think there could be a possibility. There's also the other possibility, it's hereditary. And we think possibly, back in the 90s, I think possibly my mother died of it. Not even, she was never diagnosed with anything. So the jobs I had, plants, a lot of it involved a lot of dust, a lot of chemicals from a lot of odor treatment equipment we used. There was a lot of chemicals in the air. And later on in life, when I was doing projects in a couple of plants where one was a marshmallow plant, where the air was just full of starch.
And sugar and things like that.
Right. And then the very last job I was doing, I was setting up a black soldier fly larva plant. It was in an old barn, and there was a lot of mold in the barn. We think that possibly could have been a cause too. But there's nothing that you can find that says definitely.
Right. And one thing that you told me that has been a big help since becoming involved with your current doctor and sort of getting on a treatment plan is getting involved with support groups and advocacy for IPF, helping other people out who have this condition. Can you tell us how you first became involved in support groups?
The biggest thing with this, there is no cure for IPF. There's only 2 drugs available that slow down the progression of the lung scarring. And the biggest thing, both drugs have very serious side effects. The one drug causes a lot of diarrhea in people, all kinds of other stomach problems. A lot of people can't even take it at all. The drug I'm on, pirfenidone, is the other drug, and it's supposed to cause stomach upsets. And fortunately for me, I didn't have any symptoms. The only problem I had with the drug was I was supposed to be limited to sun exposures, and I did get a little bit too much sun, and it's like a chemical burn. But I got over that now and make sure there's no sun exposure. A lot of people, when I started looking at support groups, a lot of people couldn't take the drugs because of the side effects. So the support group, with the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, the support groups, we were trying to help people to navigate through the problems with the side effects of these drugs, talking to people about finding different ways of taking the drugs with protein or taking at certain times or what to take them with and what to do after taking the drugs. So that's really where I got started in the support groups, trying to help others to get through this, because I was a fortunate one. I really didn't have any problem with taking the drug.
Gotcha. And then in a preparation for this meeting, you told me about several topics that are close to your heart regarding IPF support and are specific to this condition. The first one being the general difficulty in patients getting access to clinical trials. Can you expand on that for us?
Well, the biggest problem is there aren't that many clinical trials for IPF because it is a rare disease. We're finding now that there's more and more clinical trials coming out. The biggest problem is in Canada, there's a lot more clinical trials in the US than there is in Canada. And I've been working with Clinical Trials Ontario, trying to get more research done in this area, and also with the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. I become a patient advisor to the medical board. Every year they do so many dollars set aside for research. We go over the research that's available out there and where the money is best spent and which research should be done. Another problem is in a country like Canada, where it's so spread out, people can't get to clinics to get into clinical trials. In the clinical trial I'm in right now, what we found, we'll talk to Dr. Hole about it, I can do it. People that are too far away to do this clinical trial with Boehringer Ingelheim, they supply a spirometer, high blood pressure cuff, and oximeters, and they let you do it in the home. Of course, they teach you how to use the equipment. And you can stay at home. You don't have to travel to the clinic. You can do these tests at home, and they do them via Zoom so the doctor actually knows if you're doing it right, which is what I think is going to be a big plus in the future, where people can stay at home and don't have to go to the clinic to get these tests and be on clinical trials, even not even a clinical trial, just that they don't have their doctor every month or every 4 weeks. So some people they can do it at home, and it's a lot easier for people, especially older people, because this is a disease usually basically of people 50 and over, and it's mostly men too.
Gotcha. Another topic that is important to you is the mental health aspect of living with IPF. As you mentioned earlier, this is a progressive condition with treatment that focuses on slowing that progression and handling the effects of living with a lung disease, but there's currently no cure for it. What are some of the mental health concerns here that might get overlooked from the outset?
Well, the biggest concern is there's no cure, and you just kind of wait for the symptoms to get worse. You know they're going to get worse, and you know that the only avenue down the road, the medication you're taking is slowing progression, but the only avenue down the road is death. And the other one is lung transplant. That's most of the patients are too old or too far gone to have lung transplants. So the basic is, I know the clinical trial I'm in, every appointment I go to, there is mental health questions asked, suicide surveys done, just to make sure, because they know that people are getting close to the end of life, don't know what's going to happen. There is mental health issues. And of course, your day-to-day activities are slowed down and you can't do as much as you want. So definitely that affects your mental health. So that's one of the big things that I have to look at in this disease.
And you told me about this sort of grim milestone in the progression of IPF, which is the time at which someone has to go on oxygen, and how that's kind of seen as the beginning of the end in progression for this condition. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Definitely. You're getting along fine in your condition. Things seem to be going fine, and all of a sudden, it seems to happen pretty fast, where all of a sudden, it must be where the scarring gets to a certain point where you need the oxygen to keep going. And of course, when people, if you're not on oxygen, okay, you feel like, okay, we're going along, everything's fine. All of a sudden, you're on oxygen, and you know that this is the start of the end, because once you're on oxygen, you know the lungs are going downhill. And even the pharmacy in Canada here, the Ontario Health Department, once you're on oxygen, they won't even give you the drug anymore to slow progression because it's gone too far. So that's basically another reason there's no hope for you here at the end.
Yeah. And how to live with that sort of hanging over your head. In these groups that you speak with, what sorts of things do you discuss to sort of help, not necessarily blunt this, but just help address with people these mental health issues and this factor that this is going to progress one day? How do you cope with that?
The biggest thing is we just listen to each other, and everybody has a different way of coping with it. And when we have a meeting and there's different ideas, there's different views on what to do and how to get by this and how to cope with mental health. We have different physical rehabilitation sites that people go on. We got a couple online rehabilitation sites where you can talk to people as a group, and you can also talk to counselors to get through this. It's just something we have to do to help each other, and that's the hardest thing to do.
Another aspect of living with IPF that I know is important to you is the family factor. and how it's important for people living with a chronic condition to have that kind of built-in support system. What are some of the ways in which family and friends can get involved to help someone who's living with IPF?
First of all, understand what it is and what the problems living with it is. I know there's support groups for family, where the families can get together, and actually the family caregivers, and they can discuss ways of helping the patient get through this, what they can do to help. There's different online things that can be done. There's rehabilitation groups online. There's mental health resources online you can become part of, and everything you do, try to help you get through it till the end. There isn't much you can do until people in your family and friends, once they understand it, can help you get through it. It makes a big difference.
And what advice do you have then for someone listening who may have just received an IPF diagnosis, someone who is where you were just a few years ago?
The biggest thing is find a support group and make sure your pulmonologist is up to date on IPF, because a lot of them don't know much about IPF, and you can find out a lot online. There's a lot of good places online, Mayo Clinic and places like that, where you can go online and find information on it, and make sure that you're doing the right thing and getting the right pulmonologist and giving you the right treatment. Because that's the biggest thing right now. A lot of them don't even know what the disease is.
And do you have any final thoughts, Murray, or anything you feel like we didn't discuss that you might want to elaborate on?
I think we've done a good job. I think the biggest thing is it's a disease with no cure. Try and get into medication that you can to slow it down, and try and get into a clinical trial, because that's the only way we're going to cure the thing. My goal in a clinical trial is find a cure, and that's really what we're trying to do. When I look at the disease possibility that it could be hereditary, I want to make sure we find a drug, because I got grandkids and things coming up in life, and I don't want to pass anything on to them. And I think that's really what one of my focuses on in these clinical trials is find the cure. That's the main thing we're looking for.
Okay. Well, Murray, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. And thank you, too, for all the great work you're doing to help other IPF patients up there in Canada. We really appreciate you sharing your story and taking the time to educate our listeners on this condition and the ways people can help be supportive.
Thank you.
And remember, you can always keep up with the latest in rare disease news by visiting our website. That's at patientworthy.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and more by searching for Patient Worthy on those platforms. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Subscribing ensures you'll automatically receive our new monthly episodes as soon as they come out, and a review or rating really does go a long way toward helping us out. Finally, if you have any questions about the podcast or perhaps an idea for a future episode, you can get in touch with me by sending an email to Colby, that's Colby, at patientworthy.com. That does it for today's episode. Thank you once again to Murray Walz for joining me on the show today. And as always, thank you for listening.